There is a lie so common it feels like the air you breathe. Work hard, earn more, then your life will finally feel good, and you keep nodding because what else would you do except keep believing it? But the truth is uglier than your hope. You are not just buying things, you are buying a lifestyle of constant compliance. And one day you realize the money you earned never gave you freedom, it gave you chains that look like choices. Let's talk about money the way society avoids. Not as a spreadsheet, not as a hustle fantasy, as psychology, as identity, as control, as a deal you didn't fully read. Welcome to the hidden self. In this video, you'll see why class isn't only about income, it's about the invisible mechanism that keeps you working when you should be living. You will recognize the patterns in your own spending, your own stress, and the way you justify it as being responsible. And then, you will get the darker, more practical question: what would change if you stopped using money to soothe your fear and started using it to reclaim time? Start with the story you already know, because you've lived inside it. You work 8 hours, then you work 10. Then 6 days a week becomes your normal weather. You tell yourself it's temporary. You tell yourself you're building a better future. You accumulate, you advance, you earn more. So how exactly does your life become better? You buy a car on installment. You imagine arriving faster, breathing easier, moving like the kind of person who has options. But the reality is traffic swallows your time anyway. You're still stuck, just in a quieter cabin with a nicer sound system. Your daily frustration doesn't shrink, it just upgrades its packaging. Then you buy a higher floor apartment. You call it investing in your comfort, but comfort becomes sleep time. You go home for 6 hours, then you wake up and go back to the same pressure machine. Only now you're paying interest on the privilege of being tired in a slightly nicer box. And when you look closely, you realize something that feels embarrassing to admit. Sometimes you don't own the stuff. The stuff owns you. The payment owns your emotions. The debt owns your choices. The logo on your shirt owns how you feel allowed to take up space. The car owns your ability to say no. The apartment owns your health, because stress doesn't care how good the lighting looks. If you still believe your value is written in what you can display, I'm going to say it plainly. You have never fully lived. You've been functioning. You've been optimizing. You've been maintaining an image that other people can't even correctly read. And you've been paying for that illusion with your only asset: time. Now here's the uncomfortable part. Why do you do it voluntarily? Because the system you're inside is designed to make compliance feel like maturity. It doesn't have to chain you with steel. It just has to bind your mind with three invisible ropes. The first rope is legalized consumerism. It trains you to treat wanting as moral. It teaches you that if you don't keep up, you are falling behind. Not just financially behind, emotionally behind, socially behind, almost spiritually behind. You've seen it. The phone launches and suddenly your current device feels like a punishment. Not because it stops working, because your attention gets reprogrammed to notice its flaws. And those flaws become proof that you are not enough. Then perfumes, then shoes, then the right water bottle, then the right car, then the right minimalist lifestyle that looks effortless in photos but requires constant purchases to keep the aesthetic alive. This is not accidental. Your brain becomes an employee clocking in for the next desire. Planned obsolescence is not only about devices dying early, it's about your mind getting bored early. They don't just make products that wear out, they make your satisfaction wear out. So you work, you buy, you feel a rush, it fades. The fade becomes anxiety. The anxiety becomes the urge to buy again, and you call it self-improvement because calling it addiction would sound too honest. You become like a mouse running in a wheel, except the wheel is inside your calendar. Every month, every quarter, you are scheduled to chase the next update. Your life looks productive, your spirit looks exhausted, and you keep telling yourself you're investing. The second rope is credit and installment agreements dressed up as opportunity. Credit is genius from the perspective of control, because it doesn't just take your money, it takes your future permission. When you swipe a card or sign for a payment plan, you are literally agreeing to sacrifice freedom later so you can feel relief now. You trade years of autonomy for a shorter burst of satisfaction. It's like you're renting your own life, and the rent goes up every time you miss a payment, every time interest accumulates, every time your budget tightens and your world shrinks. What's worse is the psychological trick. Credit makes you think you've secured a better future when you've actually created a conditional future. Your future now depends on your employment staying stable. Your future depends on your health. Your future depends on the economy not turning against you. So you start living like a hostage. You don't take risks because risks might break the payment schedule. You don't get sick comfortably because sickness threatens the months of required cash flow. You don't rest because rest feels like a threat. You begin to fear life events. You become the person who checks accounts obsessively. You become the person who plans vacations not for joy but for affordability. You become the person who says maybe next year to everything that matters because next year is when you're finally caught up. But caught up never arrives. You just change the target. Next year becomes the next upgrade. The upgrade becomes the next debt. And the loop continues until you stop noticing it because noticing it would hurt too much. The third rope is social pressure disguised as taste. This one is cruel because it uses your relationships against you. You buy what you do not need with money. You do not have to impress people you do not even like. Let that sentence hit you. You do it. Not always consciously, but you do it. You fear being labeled a failure, so you spend to avoid shame. You fear being seen as behind, so you purchase to create the illusion of progress. You fear being judged for what you use, so you upgrade objects that make you feel temporarily safer. Maybe your friends bought a home, you didn't, or you didn't buy it yet, or you can't, so you buy a car that signals success. You buy a phone that signals you belong. You upgrade the apartment that signals you're making it. And then a weird thing happens. Your purchases don't bring peace, they bring more alertness. Now you have more to lose. Now you have more maintenance. Now you have more reasons to panic if your income slips. The shame doesn't disappear. It becomes a supervisor. It watches you and tells you you're always one mistake away from being exposed. I want to tell you a micro story that sounds like thousands I've heard from real people. 5 years ago, their salary was 10 million. On weekends, they took a simple motorbike or a rented car and still met friends at cafes. They were relaxed. They didn't feel ashamed in their own life. Then they got a raise. Their salary doubled, then tripled. They bought an upgraded scooter on installment. Then they moved into a shared apartment plan that looked like independence. Then they got a phone that everyone recognized instantly. On paper, they won. But emotionally, they didn't grow into peace. They grew into fear, because now their identity is tied to payments. Losing a job becomes catastrophic. Not stressful, but catastrophic. 1 month without income can collapse the entire arrangement. So they don't travel, they don't take breaks, they don't even get sick without guilt. Their body is always under negotiation with the calendar. They have more objects but less ease. They purchased more status, but they also purchased less freedom. And that is why this feels like an economic problem but behaves like an emotional trap. You didn't become poor, but you behaved like someone trying to avoid punishment. You live under invisible surveillance. Your lender, your employer, your social circle, and your own self-image. Now zoom out. If you think this is only your personal weakness, you're missing the larger mechanism. This is class as a system, not just class as a number. Look at countries where young people seem to stop chasing the future. In some places, people lie still. They stop trying. It's called different things in different cultures, but the emotion is the same. They realize work is endless and freedom is unreachable. Housing gets too expensive. Living costs in big cities eat every paycheck. Even when they work until they're destroyed, they still can't buy the life that advertisements promised. So they do something psychologically predictable. They surrender, not because they are lazy, because hope becomes mathematically irrational, and that is exactly how the system stays stable. If the system promised freedom but delivered suffocation, people would revolt. So instead, it offers just enough reward to keep you moving while it keeps the finish line out of reach. In the United States, there's a concept that sounds like satire but is real: golden handcuffs. People earn millions and still feel trapped because their life has been engineered around expenses that require constant income. Their lifestyle isn't wealth. It's a cage. Their home is a debt. Their children's education is a debt. Their security is a debt. Their social status is a debt. Their choices are conditional on continued work. They are materially rich, but time poor. And it's not because they failed at success. It's because the costs of staying impressive were built to require constant earning. They bought the lifestyle and then discovered it owns their schedule. So ask yourself, are you buying objects or are you buying the right to exist in a state of permanent urgency? Now let's talk about the manipulation of media. You've noticed the pattern without naming it. Car ads always show the vehicle moving freely through empty roads and majestic landscapes. The camera loves silence. The scenery looks untouched. The car looks like it belongs to a fantasy where you never wait in line. Reality is different. You buy the car, and most of your time in it is inching through congestion. Your freedom machine becomes a tool for converting money into stress. So what are they selling? Not a car. They're selling an imaginary self. The ad sells you the identity you want to wear. And when you buy the object, you purchase the anxiety too. Because once you attach your identity to the fantasy, you can never fully arrive. You become a collector of illusions, and the system gets the money and keeps you psychologically hungry. This brings us to the most dangerous confusion people have about money. Money is a tool, but many people treat it like a purpose. They mix them up. If you use money to buy a luxury item, you're often consuming the tool and not achieving the real goal. The real goal isn't more stuff. The real goal is autonomy of time. The power to say yes without panic. The power to say no without fear. The ability to live without negotiating every emotion with your bank account. A person with an underground rules mindset understands that money is energy. If you dump it into consumption, it leaks away. If you invest it, it accumulates and compounds. It becomes a system that eventually generates leverage. Picture this. Every cash note you save is like a soldier. If you spend it, the soldier disappears. If you invest it, the soldier multiplies and defends you. But the social narrative doesn't want you to understand this. The social narrative wants you to spend your paycheck clean every month because a person who spends is easier to predict. A person who is in debt is easier to control. A person with a fragile buffer is more obedient. You know this intuitively. If you have savings to cover 2 years of basic living expenses, you don't tolerate a bad boss as easily. You don't accept humiliation as quickly. Your boundaries become less negotiable. If you are obsessed with brand labels, you can be marketed to endlessly. If you are constantly comparing your phone, your car, your clothes, your success, you become a customer for life. So yes, the system needs you poor. Not only poor in money, poor in psychological flexibility, poor in buffer, poor in options. Then you ask, but why would a society do this? Because society is not a charity. It's a machine for distributing wealth and power. And a machine needs workers in different roles. If everyone was free, there would be no shortage of labor for unpleasant tasks. There would be no incentive for others to do the dirty work. There would be no restaurants staffed by people who can't walk away. There would be no factories staffed by those who depend on wages to survive. So the system manufactures dependency. Consumer culture is the fuel that keeps people in need of employment. It keeps you anxious enough to work even when work is degrading. When you buy something luxurious on installment, you contribute to taxes, manufacture a profit, banking interest, and you also commit yourself to long-term labor. The payment schedule is the leash, and the leash is labeled responsibility. So don't expect the education system to teach you freedom. Education teaches you how to be employable. Media teaches you how to be desirable as a consumer. Nobody teaches you how to be dangerous to the system by mastering time. Time is the currency that actually matters, not the paycheck amount, not the title, not the status symbol. Now here's a shift in perspective that will either offend you or liberate you. Think about how genuinely rich people talk about money. Ask a poor person what money is for, and you often get to buy things I like. Ask a rich person what money is for, and you'll hear to buy choices, to buy time, to get out of constraints, to cross classes. The rich rarely buy luxury to impress. They buy luxury to access networks and information. They buy meetings. They buy doors. They buy proximity to people who can shift their trajectory. They pay $50,000 to join a club or training not to play golf like it's a hobby, but to sit in the same room as people whose knowledge can be worth millions. They treat money as leverage. They treat relationships as assets. They treat systems as something to own, not something to serve. That's why when you see them dressed simply, it's not necessarily because they lack style. It's often because they are not wasting attention on external performance. They know attention is scarce. Their brain power and their time are more valuable than showing off. Meanwhile, people trying to climb spend the most on visible signals because they're compensating for inner insecurity. They need the object to borrow confidence. They don't buy confidence. They rent it from brands. Now, if you want the practical truth, It's this: the function of money in real wealth is to make work unnecessary, not immediately, not magically, gradually through leverage. There's an example that feels cold but is accurate. Imagine you spend 2 hours every day doing chores, cleaning, cooking, managing the household. You value your time low because you treat it as free. But for a wealthy person, 2 hours can be converted into 10 times the value through work or strategy. So they hire help: a cleaner, a cook, a personal assistant, a driver. They don't do it because they're lazy. They do it because their time has a market value, and they choose to allocate that value toward higher returns. Self-serving? Maybe, but also smart. It's a financial decision and a psychological decision. They refuse to sacrifice their limited attention to tasks that can be delegated, and that refusal is power. Now let's talk about debt, because this topic makes everyone defensive. You think debt is always bad. You've heard it in motivational content. You've seen it in warnings. But the difference is what the debt funds. Poor people fear debt because they use debt for consumption. Cars, phones, clothes, holidays, appearances. That debt funds assets that depreciate. So the payment drains cash flow every month, and the purchased item loses value. Rich people understand debt as a tool when it funds assets: rental properties, equity, businesses, instruments that generate cash flow. Their debt becomes a multiplier. It leverages their position. They borrow to make money work. You borrow to turn money into a thing that loses value. That's why the same word loan can mean freedom or a cage. The word is identical. The psychology and the cash flow are not. So what do you do if you want to escape the cycle of working and consuming? Working and consuming and calling it living. You need a cognitive revolution, not just a budget change, a thought system change. And I'll give you 3 phases, not as generic advice, as an escape plan for the way your mind has been trained to behave. Phase 1. Build a genuine freedom fund, not just a savings account that exists as anxiety. Most people save in a way that keeps them trapped emotionally. They stash money but still feel fragile. They still live like their next paycheck is a lifeline, not a cushion. Their savings becomes a weak belief, not a strong psychological foundation. The goal is cash that can cover your basic living for 6 to 12 months without requiring you to work another day. And yes, this sounds boring compared to investing big, but this phase is not about becoming an investor. It's about becoming unafraid. When you have that buffer, your employer is no longer your master. A bad boss can't control your nervous system as easily. Your credit score can't be used as a threat. Your life stops feeling like a penalty. Your mindset changes even if your income doesn't immediately. You stop negotiating your dignity with your salary. You become a collaborator. You can choose work instead of fearing work. And people underestimate how important that is, because most people who fail financially don't fail because they lack intelligence. They fail because they're emotionally trapped. Fear makes decision-making stupid. Fear buys overpriced solutions. Fear accepts abuse. Fear prevents long-term strategy. So phase 1 is psychological detox. Phase 2, attack consumerism directly, not with willpower, with rules that interrupt your urge. Willpower is fragile. Your brain will find excuses. Your environment will trigger you. So you need a clearing process. Sell or give away items you don't truly need. Reduce your dependence on purchase-driven identity. And here's a rule that works because it forces your brain to sit with desire until desire decays. Before you buy anything non-essential, wait 72 hours. You're not waiting to be productive. You're waiting to see whether the urge was real or just an emotional impulse. 90% of the time you'll realize you wanted the feeling, not the object. You also need to remember that every object purchases more than cost. It purchases attention, storage, maintenance, upkeep, cleaning, organizing, time spent managing what you bought. Less stuff means less mental clutter. Less mental clutter means more space for choices. And when you buy less, your freedom becomes visible, not as a motivational slogan, as a measurable reduction in stress. Phase 3, shift from consuming assets to owning assets. This is where most people pretend they understand but refuse to do. If you think money is only for buying, you will keep losing to inflation and to depreciation. You will keep trading your hours for things that fade. To escape, you need your money to move into assets that generate returns. That might be stocks. It might be equity. It might be ownership in businesses. It might be property. But the principle is consistent. Move money into things that produce cash flow or growth rather than into items that require constant rebuying. Instead of paying rent forever, look for ways to own partial rights to income. Instead of buying products, buy ownership in the companies that manufacture the demand. Instead of upgrading for image, upgrade the structure of your wealth. Then, the final part people skip, when assets start producing, do not immediately flex, buy time with that cash flow. This is where the story becomes real, because many people invest and then immediately increase their lifestyle costs. They feel richer, and then they deserve more consumption. They recreate the same trap with a higher salary. It's not freedom, it's a remix. Real wealth is not having more money, it's having fewer obligations to earn it. Once cash flow exists, reduce work hours, hire help, create space for health, create space for your relationships, create space for your identity to stop being performed and start being lived. A wealthy mind uses money to buy afternoons where the mind isn't racing. It's mornings where you don't wake up panicking. It's the ability to say, I don't want this job anymore, and mean it. Now listen carefully. The system will punish your awakening. It will call your strategy selfish. It will call you unrealistic. It will say you're not playing the game properly. Your friends will adjust. Some will envy you and pull you back into consumption because your freedom threatens their story. Family might guilt you. Social media will keep selling you anxiety disguised as aspiration. And in that moment, you'll feel something familiar, the fear that you will fall behind. But that fear is not intuition. It's conditioning. You have been trained to confuse movement with progress, trained to confuse spending with maturity, trained to confuse busyness with worth. You're not late, you're leaving. Now we end with the darkest honesty, because sugar is not the point. This game is unfair by design. The system is built to keep the majority of people as pieces on a board. You're not supposed to win easily, you're supposed to keep participating. So don't hope for a fairy tale where work automatically becomes freedom. Work can be necessary, but it doesn't create autonomy by itself. Autonomy comes from buffer. It comes from leverage. It comes from owning time. And time is not an abstract concept. Time is the only thing you cannot buy back later. One day you will look at your life and realize what you actually spent. You didn't spend money only, you spent days. Not the glamorous days, the ordinary ones. The days with tired eyes, tight chest, rushed meals, missed calls, postponed conversations. You spent them on satisfying systems that never cared about you. And when death shows up, it doesn't care what car you owned. It doesn't ask how many installments you paid. It doesn't reward your brand loyalty. It asks a question your mind avoids when you're busy. What did you neglect? Were you present with the people you love? Or did you only show up as a tired version of yourself? Did you explore who you truly are? Or did you stay trapped in the role designed for you by ads and friends and fear? So here is your call to action, and it's simple enough to be painful. Stop buying things just to impress people who don't actually know you. Start buying time back from your anxiety. Look at the most expensive item you bought recently, the one that demanded months of effort, the one you justified as necessary or an investment. Then ask yourself one question with no excuses. How many days of freedom did it cost you? And then decide what you will stop paying for, starting today. Not with your money only, with your attention, with your self-betrayal, with your automatic obedience to the next desire. Rise up, not into another purchase cycle, but into clarity, because the hidden self you've been avoiding is not a secret identity that needs branding. It's the part of you that knows you're trapped. Now act like you know it.